Our match on action and object cuts were inspired by much of the material we researched before creating our prototypes earlier this semester, as it seemed to be a key editing tool utilized by many of the films and experiences we looked at, from the filmography of Satoshi Kon to the gameplay editing of Virginia. For those unfamiliar with film terminology, a match cut is a kind of edit where either the shape or form of an object, or a similar motion, is matched from one scene to the next, with perhaps the most famous of them being this one from 2001: A Space Odyssey. We based our match on action and object transition off of a cut from Ari Aster's short film Munchausen. In this scene, one of the main characters picks up a suitcase, the camera remaining fixed and tracking on the suitcase, while the environment shifts from the character's bedroom to the trunk of a car. Similarly, for our final experience, we built a scene in which you are seated on your bed, with a suitcase placed next to you. We assumed that the natural inclination for most people would be to pick up the suitcase, so we initially based our trigger for the cut around a guest picking up and dropping the suitcase on the floor. However, internal playtesting of this transition made us rethink how this match on action and object cut should function in our final experience. We made the following changes. We found that if you bind a cut to an action, a delay in loading can break the transition. So to fix this, we put both environments in one Unity scene and loaded new assets instead of a new scene so that the transition appeared more seamless. We also made the position of the suitcase fixed instead of making it fully interactable, meaning that you can only open and close the suitcase rather than being able to pick it up. This meant redesigning this interaction entirely. So now instead of having a closed suitcase situated next to your bed, we now had an open suitcase and a few other items positioned to your left on the bed. The actual cut was then linked to the act of closing the suitcase rather than lifting it up. Making the position of the suitcase fixed also allowed us to let it occupy the majority of the frame while the cut occurs, which allowed us to ground the guest just enough into the next scene while still making it apparent that a cut had happened. We also added environmental sound to make the transition more obvious than it had been in its initial iteration. At this point in development, there was still a minor frame freezing during the transition, so for the final iteration, we decided to set both environments active at the beginning, but hugely distant to each other in the scene. The suitcase was put under the camera rig, which allowed us to teleport the guest and the suitcase to another location when the cut was triggered without a delay being noticed. The performance of this transition was optimized by replacing the loading with a simple translation. In its final implementation, we were surprised at how well match-on-action and object cuts worked within the VR format, and we got similar comments from those that playtested this transition during development. Out of all the other transitions we created for the project, this one seemed one of the most promising transitions we created, as it showcased a unification of interactivity and editing that seemed uniquely suited for VR. So in summary, here are a few takeaways we learned about executing this transition properly. To keep the cut seamless, you should not only keep both environments within the same scene, but opt to translate the position of the player rather than load in new assets to minimize delay. Keeping the focus object fixed within both scenes is key, as having it remain static allows it to take up the majority of the guest's FOV and ground them into the next scene. Changing sound cues are helpful in communicating that a cut has occurred. And finally, not only can match cuts be executed in VR, but seem to be well suited for the medium, linking VR-specific interactions and traditional film editing together in a way that felt idiosyncratic. Feel free to play around with this transition yourself in our cutting-edge VR transition tool on GitHub, link in the description below.